what is it, 25th anniversary of Phantom Menace coming out.
Oh yeah,
Um,
it's back in theaters right now, I think.
It is, and I would love to go see it if possible, but I don't know if I'm going to make it happen. But I did watch it at home with Lucy. Duel of Fates
It's so good.
is so goddamn good.
That's really good.
It puts every other lightsaber fight in the sequels, especially, to utter and complete shame.
Yeah,
Like it's and it does that, I think, because I'm a big fan of fight scenes, and the best ones you're always getting not just like cool action moves, but you're learning about the character,
right?
And it's telling a story, just like anything else in a movie.
Yes.
And I would be hard pressed to come up with a more characterful fight than Duel of Fates.
So I also thought you were just referring to the music there,
Yeah, the music
which is also
amazing.
like, I actually think even though the choreography of the fight is incredible, like without that song happening, it wouldn't be bad, but it really like makes it like transcendent.
For sure.
It's also crazy to me that after John Williams had like done Star Wars and obviously a ton of movies with iconic sounds, it's like he just like shows back up in the late 90s and is like, no, I've still got a lot left in my bag.
Yeah, here, let me
You've not heard anything yet.
Let me just real quick write one of the most iconic pieces of Star Wars music ever.
Yeah, in a movie that ended up a lot of people really don't like. I really like
I'm not
like
pretend
it
anymore. It's so
No,
it's
I
great.
love it, and I saw it when I was 10. So
Yeah.
it's like I know that my vision is completely colored with that film because of the age I saw it. So I'm definitely like it's for kids, and I was a kid when I saw it. I do think Jar Jar is it doesn't hold up amazing, but I also think people overrate how bad it is.
For sure, they absolutely do. I was also amazed by the fact that it's 25 years old and the CG is so much better than a lot of stuff coming out now.
It totally holds up.
That was pretty mind blowing. But yeah, anyways, that was just something I've been thinking about ever since watching it again. Darth Maul is definitely one of my favorite characters in all of Star Wars.
He's so good.
And he shines in that scene. And I love the character moments are just the thing that stick with me the most. I mean, besides, instantly reverting back to 10-year-old Steven as soon as the second lightsaber blade lights up.
Yeah.
Just like, I still get giddy seeing that every single time.
Because it's amazing.
Yeah. So real quick, just off the top of your head, your top, we'll say top 3 lightsaber duels.
Interesting.
I would have to say in order, Duel of Fates, Obi-Wan versus Anakin in Episode 3, and Luke versus Vader in Return of the Jedi.
Yeah. Duel of Fates is one for me, and I honestly like the Empire Strikes Back fight a lot.
I was gonna say I would
one.
include that as well.
It's got my favorite line in impressive.
Yeah, and I would probably bump the Anakin in Episode 3 for me, and it would be Fates, Empire, and not Revenge, but Return. Those 3 duels are probably my top 3.
Nice.
And as silly as it is, I do think I really like the Count Dooku Yoda fight.
Oh, heck yeah. That's great.
I definitely loved it, especially when I came out.
Yeah.
I do think
Like,
Yoda,
how does
Yoda
Yoda
flipping
fight?
a bunch is one of the things that isn't aged as well in that movie, but I loved it at the time.
Oh,
Yeah.
100%.
I loved it at the
Yeah.
time.
Well, because growing up, you're like, how was he
Yeah.
such a
Yeah.
amazing.
How does he fight?
Like, is he just use the Force? But
Yeah.
it's like, oh no, he does.
No, he
does fight.
flips all over the place.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I love those. The Dooku Anakin fight's also quite good, honestly.
Yes.
If we did a longer list, it would be up there. But
Well, and if we were talking a longer list too, I actually really like the Obi-Wan Darth Vader fight from the Kenobi series at the end.
it was quite
Pretty
good.
The series was
Yeah.
disappointing,
Yeah.
Yeah.
but that final episode, that fight was pretty good.
It was
I liked that a lot.
I would with the revenge fight. and I know I'm circling back. I think it would make my top 3 if we didn't have the high ground moment. I just don't. It just always rubbed me the wrong way. That like that was the pinnacle of the fight, was that just Obi-Wan had the high ground, and then he tries to do a backflip over his head, and I just I don't know why, but I was like, I just don't believe this. This
Well,
is so strange.
If
to
they
me.
had like explained like what high ground meant, like in some
it's
sort
like
of training,
the high ground
like,
thing is
throwback.
obvious from the jump, but it's like it just was like, wait, this is the moment he I don't know. It always bothered me.
I think it's a clumsy line. I think that maybe the meaning was like, don't do this move that is exactly how I defeated Darth Maul, because I'm 100% going to see it coming.
Absolutely. No, I know.
So
No, and it works, but
When he says "don't try it," you feel that.
yeah, you do.
Don't
You do.
try it.
You do. The "I hate you" though is good stuff though.
100%.
While he's burning up, that's good
Yeah.
stuff right there.
all right, hello, and Mike O'Vannon. Welcome to Under Towers podcast. I'm Steven.
Yes.
I'm Daniel.
And I'm Sam.
And we got a great episode for you today. First, a little bit of news. Not a whole bunch, but some interesting things. First up, we're recording this here in kind of mid-May. And on May 21st, we have new editions of the Dark Elf trilogy from R.A. Salvatore's Legend of Drizzt. It's if I remember correctly, it is the second series that he wrote. But it is the first trilogy chronologically in the Drizzt series. And they're all 3, Homeland, Exile, and Sojourn. They're all 3 releasing the same day. All have brand new, and from the images I saw on the computer, pretty sick looking covers. And I have wanted to get into that series for a very long time. So I'm excited. This is probably a good excuse to jump into that. And then we got 2 pieces of movie news here. The first being that Mr. Phil Tippett, the Oscar-winning visual effects artist from Jurassic Park, Star Wars, Starship Troopers, is working on his second stop-motion feature film. His first one was Mad God, which I still haven't seen, but looks absolutely insane.
Okay.
Very out there, bizarre, fever dream,
Cool.
horror stuff.
Nice.
That came out in 2022. This new film is called Sentinel and is going to be being pitched to potential financial partners at Cannes later this month.
Nice.
Tippett explained that Sentinel will be a mixture of, quote, the whole history of VFX, from stop motion to digital and now AI. I can mix and match all these techniques. And from Variety, Sentinel will begin, quote, like a traditional World War I film. The film's main narrative expands wildly in the moments before a soldier's death.
Interesting.
So probably going to be another very trippy, violent, horrific kind of thing. So definitely stoked about that. And then finally, Francis Ford Coppola's sci-fi epic Megalopolis is hopefully coming to screens this year.
Okay.
Wow.
He's been working on this forever. I think the original idea came out, I think he came up with the original idea in the 70s.
Yeah.
Started working on the script, I believe, as early as, I think, 1983.
Yeah.
And just couldn't find backers for it anywhere. Finally just paid for it himself.
Wow.
And again, sometime later this year, I hope. The cast is stacked. Adam Driver, Aubrey Plaza, and Natalie Emmanuel, Giancarlo Esposito, Shia LaBeouf, Dustin Hoffman, Talia Shire, Lawrence Fishburne, etc., etc.
Dustin Hoffman?
Yeah.
Wow.
And a trailer has not been released, but they did release a clip, and I will say it's odd.
Nice.
In that it kind of looks like a late 90s music video.
Weird.
It's
Okay.
the clip is just of Adam Driver stepping out of this kind of hatch window on top of a giant New York skyscraper and walking up to the edge and leaning over like he's gonna fall, and then freezing time. And backing away from the ledge and then restarting time. So doesn't really show a lot. The thing that made it feel very kind of music video to me, it's got this like kind of odd yellow tint to it.
Yeah.
And the he's standing, on top of a skyscraper.
Yeah.
And the clouds are moving past, obviously sped up in a science fiction-y kind of way.
Yeah.
But there's no wind hitting him.
Interesting.
So it looks and feels very green screen.
Yeah.
So this is just a first look clip. It's Francis Ford Coppola. Not
Yeah.
everything that he's done has been a smash hit, but I mean, he obviously Godfather.
He's done
Yeah.
good things.
So we'll see.
But that
We'll
sounds
see.
like a Creed music video.
That was 100% where my mind went.
Yeah.
Was
Nice.
it's like
With arms.
it was about to be higher by Creed.
Oh my god.
But so we'll see. It's a sci-fi epic, and it has something to do with, I guess, a modern science fiction version of New York mixed with ancient
Yeah.
Rome. So
No, it's cool to see like really thoughtful directors making original sci-fi material. So I'm like I'm excited. It's been talked about for a long time. So hopefully it's at least interesting.
yeah, I'm sure it will at least be interesting. So
Yeah.
cool. So our main topic tonight. Last episode, we talked about what got us into science fiction and fantasy. Today, we're going to have a discussion about genre in general and the concept of genre. Just as kind of a starting off point to answer just like what is genre. According to Webster, I thought this definition was fine. A category of artistic, musical, or literary composition characterized by a particular style, form, or content. So that's kind of
Nice.
literal dictionary definition of genre. My question about genre, and I'm as a sci-fi fantasy dork and as a metalhead, I have a distinct, mostly love. I'd say not a love-hate, but a love annoyance relationship with genre. Because what I see very often in both spaces is genre being, on the one hand, a very useful tool for categorizing and finding things that you like based on other things that you like. But what I start to get annoyed by is the proliferation of subgenres
Yeah.
and the kind of gatekeeping elitism.
Yeah.
Like exactly what you said, Daniel, where it's like,
Yeah.
this isn't that, that's not this, because it doesn't adhere to whatever, like, obscenely strict lines you have in your head for that particular genre.
Yeah.
What are your guys' thoughts on that? I mean, subgenres are cool, and I think it's cool to be, especially to be able to mix and match different things from different areas, but it can get overboard sometimes.
So I like describing things and putting things in boxes because I do think it helps you understand. It gives you a context for what something is and what mode the author or writer is thinking. But what I like is when an author is intentionally writing something in a certain mode. And when there's intentionality from the creator to use certain settings and tropes that have been done before, and then usually to apply some different kind of spins on them or a unique take, I find that immensely valuable. Not that the author has to come out and say this is this thing or not, but when there is like, when someone's making a Western and they're going to use the Western tropes, there are certain like points I say have to hit, but you don't really have to, but there are going to be things you hit, and then like creativity comes when it's like we're going to do that lens in a new way or a different way, or I've got an idea to express that in a new way. I find that immensely valuable. I don't like when it's the other way around, where we're applying genre after the fact to like describe and, like you said, box things up here and there, and this is this and this isn't that, and it's all that. Like I love when people are writing in a certain mode and they're trying to, like, point being, like, you're writing a fantasy epic and you want people to be thinking about other fantasy epics while they're reading yours, to compare and contrast them, to make different points. So like that's where genre is valuable to me, when something is like writing in a tradition, or making a movie where it's like, I want you thinking about Lord of the Rings when this happens in my movie, even though this is different. Like, you should be remembering these things. That stuff I love, and I find value in it, because then authors will critique other works, or, directly reference, or that. I love that stuff. I find you get more value, and more, like, things are said when people operate in those modes. But the other thing, like you're talking about, when genre is used as like a marketing tool, hey, it's this thing and it's that. It's like that. Those are the things where it's like, I don't know. It's definitely, your mileage may vary in those regards.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, genre is like, I think it's kind of, it like, there's positives that I see and negatives too. So like the whole idea of it. I think for like starting creativity stuff though, I think it's kind of a problem for, I think, creative like things, because a lot of times you have to kind of pigeonhole whatever it is you're making to fit in a genre, just so you can like feel like you can share it with somebody. Because a lot of times if you go to create something, and like if I was Gene Wolfe sitting down to write a book of the New Sun, I'd be like, oh, this is, you're thinking of how the genre comes across based on the setting. You can't
Right.
mix like lasers and swords.
Right.
Like, you can't mix those two things, because the genres that go along with that also lend to like what the setting is. And I think that it's just such an interesting thing. Genre feels like an after the fact thing. Somebody made something awesome, and then we had to find a way to like classify it and like categorize it. And I think that's where it's like helpful, just, like rearranging your house and stuff like that. But I think it's kind of harmful to creativity, at least from the onset. But then again, it's also a good starting point for some people.
Yeah, I think
Like, if you want to go make a Western,
Yeah.
then you have a starting point. You have tropes to refer to. You have
Yeah.
something. But that also is based on something somebody else did before. So
Yeah.
it's like,
But there is a lineage of, like, and I'm not going to be able to speak well on this, but like Westerns obviously are referring to a time in history, and then like the myths of that time. But then those fictions are also based on like some of the, I think they could probably go back to some of the like Paul Bunyan tall talesy type,
right.
frontiersman stories. And then those are, based on other adventure stories before those. So there is like a lineage as they like defined. And then similar with like a genre like sword and sorcery, that starts because they're, really starts mostly probably with Tarzan, which isn't really sword and sorcery, but
like
you've got
pulp
action,
men's magazine
and then we end
stories.
up kind of doing those in like a magical world fantasy setting, and then you sort of end up over time with creation. Well, now we kind of have this pseudo definable thing called sword and sorcery.
Yeah.
So, but like, so that's where genres are all the time like popping up out of people being creative. And then you look back on it, and then all these things, like, because a lot of like Conan wasn't thought of as sword and sorcery till like
Right.
20 years after.
It's like,
it was
it's an
written.
after the fact thing.
Yeah. Well, it can be both though, because there's like
Yes. Yeah.
telling a pirate story. You're like, it's the same thing with the Western. It's like, I want to write this. So it's interesting. It can be both, but you need a skilled author to play with it, because you do get someone making a genre movie.
Yeah.
And then they just hit all the beats, and then it's like, this is just not.
We've done this.
There's not really any value in it.
Well, I think it's also interesting when you look at something like Conan, or the best example being, especially in our sphere, being Lord of the Rings, where you have essentially an entirely new genre that's being created by someone. So you pointed out, Daniel, that Tolkien didn't describe Lord of the Rings as fantasy.
Yeah.
even though it is the fantasy book.
Right.
I think in large part because that's not what fantasy meant
Yeah.
at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And now we look at it, and of course, like you think fantasy literature, and
You think
you almost certainly are going to think of J.R.R. Tolkien.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I did a little reading this week about and reading some of his letters, and it was funny. He was talking about winning. He won a fantasy award in 1957, I think, after which would have been right after I think Return of the King came out, and it was actually pretty funny. It was a letter to his editor, and he was talking about how it was nice to win the award, and he talked about some of the other books there, but he mentioned like not liking a lot of the things people were writing, but didn't go into detail, but then mentioned a few things he did like, and then was like, it's nice because I'll get a bunch of money from winning this award. So it was kind of pretty funny. And then he mentioned like having a meeting with a producer, and I did remember that they were talking about making a movie really early on, and he was like, our thoughts on this are the same. It's either money or art. Either you pay us a ton of money and you can do whatever you want, or we want total control of what it looks like.
Yeah.
And it was funny. It wasn't both and. It was either one or the other. He
Yeah.
was like, if you pay us enough money, he's like, I don't really care, which is kind of funny because that doesn't feel J.R.R. Tolkien to me.
Yeah.
But at some point, he was like, yeah, cash is great.
Everyone has a price.
It made me chuckle. I'd never seen that before, which that's kind of a tangent. But yeah, Tolkien talked about Lord of the Rings being a heroic romance, which a romance story, and specifically heroic romance, was a type of writing in the 17th century, so throughout the 1600s, especially popular in France. But it was your sort of Arthurian.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's like the old school Arthur stories.
Sometimes in prose, sometimes in verse. But it's like a quest, and then there's wacky, mythical, magical things going on, and then there's usually tales. And at first sometimes it's just like, I was like, that doesn't really make sense. But then honestly, thinking about Lord of the Rings, especially the first book, Fellowship, and the first book of that book, it is, it's a quest, obviously, but Frodo gets into a bunch of very strange and sort of disjointed misadventures after about chapter 3, where they get eaten by a tree, and then the very strange Bombadil, wonderful but strange Bombadil adventure, which you really don't get that kind of scene in a lot of other fantasy nowadays. There are people that tap into that strangeness and unexplained kind of thing, but like,
to his credit, I would even say like Moorcock had it was maybe some of the most of that I've read.
Yeah, which is funny because he very famously did not enjoy Tolkien's books.
Yes,
so
that's
just
irony.
kind of strange.
Irony.
No, but he did. He had a goofy, unexplained strangeness to what was going on with his. But then from there, we get to the Barrow-wights, and then they pick up the swords, and then it kind of goes on. And then kind of from there, it's like a normal story. But like you've kind of got this strange, wandering, like. They're not short stories, but they're very like episodic moments that are more part of those romance stories before it kind of delves into the big theme.
Yeah, until they get to Rivendell and the quest
and then
starts.
the quest really starts because the first mission is just to get to Rivendell. So it's like you can see, I think Tolkien was trying to write in that mode. And I think people don't really write stories that way, but also a lot of the Lord of the Rings stuff, especially in the beginning and in The Hobbit and in the beginning of, the Unexpected Party, or I'm not saying that name right, but the chapter name, but it's very whimsical and it's very like, we've got Tolkien doing like the silly little hobbits, and there's like lots of little jokes and like in there. But then like as the story goes, most of that writing goes away. And he's writing in a very archaic style, and there's like lows and beholds with an exclamation point, and then like more the sentence continues type writing, which that is very old-fashioned heroic moments, romance, epic moments.
Well, and when you first brought up the term heroic romance, the first thing that I thought about was our literature class in high school and
Yeah.
talking about the romantic style of writing. I don't know if you would
Yes.
even call it a genre, but the literary style.
Yes.
I think Scarlet Letter was the book that we read that was
Yes.
epitomizing that.
Mhm.
But that's kind of where my mind went with that. The hallmarks of that style of writing being not the romance is not like between individuals.
No.
It's not a relationship. It's more, oh, I'm sad and something horrible has happened, so I'm outside and it's pouring down rain.
Yes. Yes.
Or I'm happy and the sun is shining and birds are singing. Like
Yeah, it's all
the
evidence. Yeah.
the environment reflecting the story and the characters
And
their
there is
emotions.
a good bit of that in Lord of the Rings, and I think that's part of why it stays endearing, because he's where a lot of people wrote post Tolkien referring to Tolkien, where like things end up being more self-referential, and that's why sometimes I think things can feel hollow when people are trying to do the created world, and they're referencing less, where Tolkien is referencing the Eddas and the sagas, and he's
And then
like
the Kalevala
the
and
Kalevala.
everything.
He's pulling from all these ideas, and then also doing an Arthurian. It's not Arthurian literally, but like that style of quest in an invented world, which is supposed to be our world. He's also like, the thing that amazes me that I think about is like the, even though this is actually an older thing, but like the very interesting idea that like the Red Book, which is the history, like I often forget that when we read Lord of the Rings, Tolkien tells us that we are reading a translation of an actual book that exists.
Yes.
So like, which is also an interesting idea. I think a lot about this and this isn't necessarily genre, but Tolkien also says he likes reading histories, real or imagined. And
I love that.
so in his mind, Lord of the Rings is a history. So it's and I that's one thing I think authors these days, not to be a whole people don't write as well as they used to, but I think when people don't write, when things kind of miss that depth that Lord of the Rings has, it's because they aren't writing a history. They're writing a novel. He very specifically said, the Lord of the Rings is not a novel. Obviously, it's several books, but he thinks of it as a real history of an imagined past of humanity's of a forgotten age. And then he also talks about how he felt the stories were like revealed to him over time, which is also just an interesting kind of idea. But,
It's very Robert E. Howard said
yeah,
the same thing too.
Yeah, well, and there's also an interesting idea where, this is the third age where Lord of the Rings takes place. There's some people that say that the Hyperborean age is the fourth age, and that there's actually you could do a continuity of Conan and Lord of the Rings where
They're
Conan
moving
comes
together.
just after Lord of the Rings, and it actually
That's
it
kinda
actually
cool.
it is cool. It's kind of a
Neat.
fun idea. But I do think I think things that have like weight and depth to them. And there's lots of great writing these days. I don't mean to disparage writers, but when you're comparing them to like the great works of fiction, I do think people got fixated on creating imaginary worlds, which is great. But then I think they lose sometimes that like. I love that Tolkien is like, he's very intentional about what you are reading, and what you are reading is a translation of a history. And then we know then that part of it was written by Bilbo, most of it was written by Frodo, and a little bit was written by Sam. So there are character authors in there that are there. And I do think for a lot of people, they don't think that through. Like, what actually are you reading? And obviously you're just reading a book somebody wrote, but like Tolkien is more considered about, nope, we're writing a history in the style of an epic romance or a heroic romance, excuse me, because he actually said it wasn't an epic as well, even though it is very epic.
Right.
But it's like, so there are like layers of genre and setting that Tolkien's doing, and I think because he's actually accurately pulling from all those things, that's part of why what we have in the Lord of the Rings is so wonderful. And it's where it's like there's settings and there's genres and there's a mode of storytelling that like, I do think if you want to write well, it's best to obviously have been well read and then pull from a lot of different things. Because I think a lot of where, you mentioned it being a creative stumbling block for authors sometimes when you start out making a genre. But, and this is kind of a weird comparison, but I think a lot of like Vampire Weekend, which is a band I enjoy,
Yeah.
where they're making indie rock, but then they're, they've got stuff inspired by some very, some interesting sort of like African music and other sorts of genres, and then they add a classical twist on it.
Yeah.
So they're like, there's 4 layers of thing happening.
That's kind of what I'm saying though, is because indie rock wasn't called indie rock. Like
Sure.
They called it that after the fact.
Yeah.
After
But
people
I mean, by the
called
time Vampire Weekend was, it was being called that
Well,
at the
now
time.
Vampire Weekend is indie pop.
Well,
It's kind of something
fair
that
enough.
they made up. Like, and that's the thing. Like Tolkien, like if his publishers, if he had, let's imagine that they knew he was a great writer, and they're like, you have something great. I need you to write an epic fantasy.
Yeah.
And then he would approach that being like, well, I don't want to do that. I'm going to do a heroic romantic thing. And then it ends up
Yeah.
being that.
No, that's very fair.
And that's what I'm like.
That's what I mean. I think when it's from the author, when it is like, if producers show up and say, I want you to make me XYZ, that's usually trash. Unless someone has a very interesting idea already in that mode.
Yeah.
There's often people trying to fulfill a need.
Like the creativity has to lead the genre.
But when someone says, I want to tell a Western, but I also want it to be, I want a sci-fi setting for my Western, and then I also want it to be, related to the Odyssey. I want to tell a Western in the style of like a Odyssey with things like that actually sounds very interesting.
Yeah.
Again,
but now what are you making epic fantasy?
But again,
or what are you doing? Yeah.
Yeah, but you're using genre. But then again, if it's successful, someone will call that, well, that's Space Cowboy.
Yeah.
It's its own
now
thing.
It's its own genre.
It's
all these people are making a bunch of Space Cowboy things. Yeah.
So when I was in film school, I can't remember which writing class it was, but one of the writing classes that I took, we were discussing genre, specifically in film. But I think that this path, you can see this kind of circular path that genre takes in all art.
Yeah.
Being that you have a beginning point, and Western is the easiest way to look at this.
Yeah.
You have the starts out kind of slow, and if it gains a certain amount of popularity, you move into the golden age of that genre.
Mm-hmm.
So with the Western, you're looking at like the John Ford, John Wayne collaboration. That's where like your main tropes are established, and you get hundreds and thousands of pieces that are in this space with these tropes, and some of them are absolute classics, just by weight of numbers. A lot of them are not, and a lot of them end up being kind of carbon copies, especially the longer that golden age goes.
Yeah.
And then, it kind of ends up happening in an interesting way, in like this organic, almost like a living thing, which is an interesting concept of ideas and creativity and art being a living thing, like not a spirit, not really in the hands of the artist.
Yeah.
But you have, in order to save itself, the genre then kind of, it has to subvert itself.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And again, using Westerns, that's when you start having like Clint Eastwood being the man.
Yeah.
And the spaghetti Westerns.
Yeah.
And then the movies that he directed, like Unforgiven, where all of a sudden it's not the old golden age, good guy, white hat, bad guy, black hat Westerns.
Yeah.
All of a sudden you have, Unforgiven, where Clint Eastwood is playing this, retired gunslinger, old man having to live with his past, and that idea of what happens to the guy in the white hat or the black hat after the movie, after he's killed all of these people in his youth. And so that subversion of expectations, that turning the genre on its head and kind of looking at it in a more quote unquote realistic way.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's another turn of not fully going back to the golden age, but sometimes returning back to it, not at the same frequency, and having a more kind of mixed and balanced approach to the genre. Mm-hmm. And again, using the Westerns, you could look at one of my absolute favorites, Silverado,
Yeah.
Yeah.
which Lawrence Kasdan wrote and directed. I think it might have been Kevin Costner's first movie, but I could be mistaken. But young Kevin Costner, again, another stacked cast, but that is very much a very loving and very like perfectly executed return to that kind of golden age
vibe
of Westerns. And frequently genre never returns to its former status.
Yeah.
So like Westerns were the thing for a long time.
Yeah.
And they've never really attained that spot, but kind of
it
pops up
bubbles
every
back
once
up to
in a
the
while.
surface. Yeah.
And
There was sort of a mini renaissance, I guess, for Westerns, though, like in your late 80s.
well, and
90s with, like, Tombstone
and again in kind of the the early 2000s with like 310 to Yuma and
yeah. I mean, more recently too, like the Hateful Eight, the Magnificent Seven,
Yeah.
the remakes of those.
Yeah.
And then Costner kind of killed it with Dances with Wolves. Again, I'm just kidding. Which is not actually a bad movie.
No,
right?
it's a
good movie. It's
classic.
It's just too long.
It's very long.
Yeah, lot of narration there.
But you can see that same kind of progression, I think, with fantasy literature. Specifically, if you're looking at like the high fantasy, epic fantasy, the Tolkienian fantasy, and then the transition into things like grimdark, with Black Company. The most famous example that people would point to being Game of Thrones, where it's like it's a very epic fantasy in a very established world with intense world building, but and you can argue whether this is true or not, but a more grounded in reality approach to the characters and the story and the
Most
setting.
of like bad things happen.
Yeah. Well, and morally gray characters, like, the Black Company really delves into that of like what is good and evil.
Yeah.
What is the actual difference between the people on those either side? And,
Right.
But yeah, I do think it's interesting to look at that. I saw a meme. I've seen several variants of this meme that I found tickled my funny bone. That was something like, there's only two genres of fantasy. There is the once there were dragons in this land, and there was magic, and now they're all gone, but maybe someday the dragons will return.
Right.
And then the second is, how the fuck are we going to kill all these dragons?
Yeah.
and it's funny, but I think you could probably actually go through and
you can make a lot of stories fit into that. Yeah.
Into those two genres.
We could have get rid of all these dragons.
That's so funny.
Something triggered me the other day. So I was watching a video on YouTube, and I've heard this come up several times. So this was not just this one person, but in a booktube sphere of discussion, they were specifically talking about books we're going to be reading next month for book club, the
Cool.
Faithful and the Fallen.
Oh, cool.
And they were trying to describe the subgenre that it fits in, and they were using grimdark as a reference point, because really the era that it's written in and the violence that John Gwynne writes, he writes violence, chef's kiss, so well. But it's absolutely not grimdark at all. It's dark, but it is, full of hope and definite good and bad characters, and there's some gray areas, but nothing compared to grimdark literature. And the phrase that I've heard pop up several times now is, this is so cringe, noble dark.
Oh, God.
And I started yelling at my phone. It was like, it's not, there's no such thing. That's not noble. It's heroic fantasy.
Yeah.
It's heroic fantasy.
Noble dark.
It's already exists.
I will say that is a thing with genres. Like, if the title sounds good, we can go with it. But Noble Dark sounds ridiculous.
It sounds.
So we just need to shelve it.
Please, look at me. Look at me.
It's like he's Voldemort, but he did help a lady across the road.
It's not
He did do that the solid for her.
Noble Dark does
Noble
not
Dark.
exist. It's called heroic fantasy. It branched off from sword and sorcery and epic fantasy at the same time that Grimdark did. Just went in a different direction.
So I'm gonna write a genre called Dainty Dark.
Dainty
And it's like
Where you're like
Pride and Prejudice.
Yeah.
No, that's. I'm
Dark.
sorry. That would be called
Yeah.
cozy dark.
That's Cozy Dark? Okay,
Dark.
Cozy Dark.
Cozy Dark.
Oh, I love that.
I do like Dainty.
I honestly, I
Whimsical
actually,
Dark is another one.
yeah, I would
I'm sure.
I would read a cozy.
It's like
dark.
it's Tom Bombadil,
Cozy Dark
but
actually
he's
could
a
be good.
serial killer.
Yeah.
Cozy Dark is like the Legends and Lattes, except
I was about to say,
except
yeah,
it's like it's not a nice little coffee shop. It's a dingy.
it's a
like
torture
biker
chamber
bar.
or something. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. But biker bar. Yeah. No, that's perfect.
They like serve lollipops or something.
So to circle back to the we've got to kill all these dragons versus the there used to be dragons idea in fantasy.
I really love that.
Yeah, it's great. I've been reading Man and His Symbols by Carl Jung, and he talks a lot about archetypes and the importance of dreams, and that archetypes, which are the embodiment of certain story characteristics that are deep embedded in the human psyche. Basically, he argues that these things exist with us, whether we learn them in the culture or not. And he gives a lot of evidence based on myths and the stories of more primitive and remote cultures, both past and present, to relate to those things. But it something struck me thinking about those two genres is that he talked about the archetype of the hero, which he says is really the symbol of a person becoming a person, overcoming the world to be a conscious individual, to do your own thing. That's really what the deep basis of that archetype of storytelling, which that's the story of killing the dragon to be yourself fully embodied in the world. And the interesting thing I was thinking about there is I really think the loss of magic story, that the elves are leaving or the dragons are gone or these things are now fairy tales. This is not something Jung has talked about, at least not when I've read it, but I feel like that's the loss of innocence. And I feel like it's the loss of innocence, it's the losing of magic of the world and having to live in a world that's more mundane and more thing, and then usually those stories are about no, the magic is actually still there. You're just missing it, or we've run it away, and we have to
bring it back.
And I
It's like the Hallmark version movie of it.
yeah, I know, and I'm cheeseballing it right now, but
you're onto something.
I think those two ideas are really important. Where there's the story of I will be a person in this world and kill and slay the dragon to be me. And then the other big fantasy trope is I will regain my imagination.
Yeah, I will bring it back.
I will bring my imagination back. And it's interesting that one idea is kind of leaving childhood to be you. And then one is like, well, actually I killed that dragon, but maybe I shouldn't have killed it. Maybe I should have not learned to live with it. You don't learn to live with dragons, but but I need to bring that back.
Maybe
I
that's
need to
Noble
carry it
Dark.
with me. Yeah, and that is what Noble Dark is. No.
How to
please,
live
no,
with
God, no.
dragons.
I feel like Noble Dark.
If that's the case, How to Train Your Dragon is the first Noble Dark
Yeah, that's what it is.
movie. Yeah.
If you just throw in a lot more gore and blood.
Yeah.
This is like the books where like chicks want to get plowed by elves type stuff.
Well, I think there's.
I'm glad I caught that last line.
Is that gonna?
Yeah, one thing I want to touch on here, that's kind of in the vein of what we touched on very briefly at the beginning of the problem I have with the gatekeepery and elitism kind of angle to genre is something I've noticed, and I'm far from the first person to make this observation, but the kind of pushing of books written by women authors for primarily female audiences being relegated. First it was to YA, and now to romantasy, what they're calling. And you see Sarah J. Maas is the big one that jumps to mind. I think I'm not going to say I'm familiar enough with the genre to say that she started it. I'm sure that that's not the case. But certainly the the current level of popularity, I think you could point to Sarah J. Maas and her work with Throne of Glass and A Court of Thorn and Roses specifically. That I remember used to be always stacked in YA in the young adult section. Mm-hmm. And now it is in the fantasy section where it should be, because, again, I've not read them. My wife is a big fan. And from what she's told me, it is all wildly inappropriate for young adult audiences. That's beside the point. The point really being that I see a trend, and this is kind of nerd culture in general, but speaking specifically of fantasy literature, of kind of using genre terms and subgenres to kind of pigeonhole and push aside books written by women for primarily female audiences as like a lesser version of fantasy. Like example being Court of Thorn and Roses. I was talking to my wife about this, and she said, I asked her, where would you shelve this? Would you put it in the romance section or in the fantasy section? And she unequivocally said that she would categorize it in fantasy, because you could take all of the romance and the sex and all of that out of the series, and it would still have essentially all of the same genre tropes that you would find in any other modern epic fantasy. And yet, because it has fantasy as in like fantasizing fantasy that is more through the female lens than something like we've read, like the Draenei Saga or Conan, or these kind of very macho, manly fantasies of violence and heroics and all this stuff. Because it's coming from the more female lens, it's relegated as lesser than, even though it's hitting a lot of these same beats, these same tropes and everything as traditional fantasy. And I see that as a problem, not just morally, but also like shooting yourself in the foot as far as trying to continue having more of this genre. It's like, do you want the genre to die, or do you want to welcome in this not new but this growing audience?
Yeah.
And help welcome and introduce them to other books and other worlds and series, and help more stuff get made.
Yeah, it's funny with the gatekeeping. It's sort of it just sort of speaks to a strange like insecurity about your confidence in the things that you like. And I understand having definitions for things and having clear lines, and if you like, you could have an unvarnished opinion that like, I think this should be classified as this, assuming you've like read it and considered it. But to do it in that weird like gatekeeping, this is not this and it's lesser than, it's just strange. When it's like, you know what, if you're not interested in a book, just don't read it. Like, and there's
so much to read.
Yeah, nobody's gonna be. I say nobody. Somebody might be mad at you, but who cares? Like, I just don't have energy to have, I just don't have energy for that. It's strange to me, people that do have all this energy to call things not this or that. Again, I'm all for a discussion on how to classify a book and what sort of tropes and what is this book actually related to or pulling from. I think those discussions are actually markedly enjoyable, but
absolutely,
but like the snobbery, I don't have time for it.
No, for sure. Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, fun discussion, guys. So to close things out, we're going to do another top 10 list today. We're going to be doing our top 10 video games, our favorite video games.
Yep. Getting my list.
So while you guys are pulling up your list, I'll go ahead and start us off here with some honorable mentions. I think we all have some honorable mentions to throw out before our list. And I want to shout out, this is too long, but it was even longer. I had to pare it down to these. All of these games I absolutely love, and if we were doing a top 20, top 30 list, these would be here. But they didn't make the cut because I just haven't played them in a long time. That's pretty much the only reason. So shouting out some honorable mentions, we got Shadow of Mordor. I absolutely
Okay,
love that
yeah.
game. It took all the mechanics that were great about the Batman Arkham games,
Mm-hmm.
put them in Lord of the Rings, and the Nemesis system. I don't know. I guess somebody's copywritten that or something. I don't know why that has not made it into other games, but that made it so fun to kill or think you kill an orc and then have it show up again hunting you later
Yeah.
and more powerful and pissed off because you killed it previously. Uh, it would just it made it added a level of depth to the world that was so much fun. And then Warcraft 3, I played the fire out of that game. I loved real time strategy games. I still do. I just don't have a gaming PC, so I don't play them very much anymore. But that's an absolute classic. It made me fall in love with that world. Counter-Strike Source, that was the online game that I played the absolute most. Great memories as a teenager playing that with my dad. Very simple game compared to online games now as far as game modes and everything. But absolute classic. We owned a server. We were part of a guild. It was so much fun.
Awesome.
I still have friends. Shout out East to this day from playing that game. Battle Realms, another real-time strategy game. Way ahead of its time, had some really cool mechanics. It was like fantasy, feudal Japan instead of fantasy
Nice.
medieval Europe. I believe it came out almost literally at the same time as Warcraft 3, so it just completely got overshadowed, but wildly underrated game. And then my one more real-time strategy, the Age of Empires series in general. That was, I think I don't remember if I played it for the first time at your house or the second time at your house. But that was very early on in our friendship. Age of Mythology, I think specifically, is probably my favorite in the series. And then wanted to shout out Overwatch.
Yeah.
That was the online game that I've played the second most. I tried to get into Overwatch 2. It's not for me anymore. Too many changes. I don't like the new game modes. But when it first came out, even when it was massively unbalanced as far as the characters went, like Counter-Strike before it was very simple, just a couple game modes. Very cool, colorful, unique characters. Great gameplay that was already very polished in my mind out of the gate. And even with all of its wrinkles and everything, and again, it was not terribly well balanced in some cases, it still was just a blast to play. And I played it nonstop for like essentially a year. I didn't even touch another video game.
That's worth an honorable mention for sure.
Who wants to go next as far as some honorable mentions go?
I can. So for my honorable mentions, there's a lot of games here that I really loved and I thought would be in my top 10, but then just kind of got pushed down when I really started to rank them. But I loved, so right here, like no Mario game is in my top 10, but I loved Paper Mario. I'm a big RPG fan, and Paper Mario games are awesome. And then both right next to each other in the way I've got it feeling. I've got Super Mario World and Super Mario 3. Super Mario 3 was the first one I played. And as I was thinking about it, that would probably be my favorite. But also the one I actually played the most was Super Mario World with Yoshi, which was also, it was a little easier, but still challenging. Where Mario 3 is actually really hard, and I played it as a pretty young person, so I just died a lot. I don't actually ever think I got past the second world without using the flute. So like, I had to think about that. Then I've got my two favorite fighting games. Well, except for my actual top fighting game, but Tekken 2 and Soul Calibur 3. Not in my top 10. Probably should have been. Tekken 2 is the one I played the most. Love Soul Calibur 3, but I felt like for my emotional attachment, I never owned that game, but I played it at your house all the time, Steven.
All the time.
I love that game. I played actually a lot. Oh, and that would actually probably have been Soul Calibur 2, but that was one I actually played a lot in the arcade. But the Soul Calibur franchise is awesome. Right up next, Time Splitters 2, one of my favorite shooters. Kind of in the GoldenEye mode of shooters, but silly. But the mechanics were basically GoldenEye.
Way ahead of its time too.
Yeah. Again, another one I really thought would be in my top 10, but just like it got pushed down. And then game I grew up loving was Amazon Trail 2. I wanted to include a series from either Amazon or Oregon Trail. I played the crap out of that when I was like 10 years old, and I loved that game. Like hunting the Paracacus in the river. It was the best. And then the most fun thing was when you went into the river bushes and you like had to do this like maze trail, and then you could find President Roosevelt and help him get saved, like help him save him. It was like
So
it was the
awesome.
best. It was the best. Then last couple honorable mentions: Octopath Traveler kind of brought that 2D 3D back. I love RPGs. That's a recent game, and I just absolutely adored playing it. It would have probably been higher if the stories for the characters were actually good. The stories are interesting, but they're just kind of like meaningless.
Yeah.
And so it pushed it down. And then last, like the one that really hurt me that it's not in my top 10, but I loved the game. I played the just snot out of it was Dynasty Warriors 4.
Heck yeah, dude.
One of my most favorite games, but it was one where like it's just like mindless fun. And I just felt like everything else in my top 10 I had more of an emotional attachment to that wasn't just nostalgia for the enjoyment of playing it.
Yeah.
It's just kind of a, that being said, like I could just, kill those random Chinese soldiers just over and over and over again.
Bro, that was
It was such a blast.
the number of
The game,
hours
yeah.
that we played in that game.
Untold hours.
That's great.
Sam, you got any honorable mentions?
I do. I think I have like 3.
Okay.
Ark is probably one of my honorable
I don't even know
mentions.
what that is.
It's where you get dropped in an island. You're completely naked. You wake up and there's dinosaurs everywhere. And you have to
Okay.
Heck
you
yeah.
have to build up like your base and stuff.
Is that the Breath of the Wild knockoff game?
No. This is like a first-person sort of
Oh,
like
okay,
thing,
okay.
and you have to build up a base, and it's like online. The whole thing is online. So if you don't protect your base, whenever you like clock out, people will just come and take.
Oh,
your
interesting.
stuff.
That's cool.
So it was actually kind of a pain in the butt to play because you had to pick your world. So I had a friend in Australia who made us his own server, and so with that we were like kind of safe from each other. I mean, obviously dinosaurs could come and just destroy
Yeah.
all of your stuff. That game was great, very very hard to play, and then we've got a bunch of hacks just so we could start riding on T-Rexes and stuff. You can build a whole like fort on top of a T-Rex.
Yeah.
It's pretty insane. So that's an honorable mention. Pokemon Stadium, I think it's
Okay.
probably
Yeah.
because I played those mini games so much.
That's true. The mini games were excellent. The mini games were better than the
That's all I
base game,
played.
probably.
I didn't
Yeah.
play any of the other parts except the mini games.
Mini games were
so
great.
great.
Mini
And
games
then
were great.
I think I'll put Spyro on there because I
Okay.
really like the Spyro game.
Heck yeah.
Spyro probably should have made my honorable mentions, to be honest.
Yeah. So I'll just stick with those 3. I could go on, but
Yeah.
Those are great.
I'll just do it.
All right, so getting into the actual top 10 list, at number 10, mine is Soul Calibur. The franchise in general, I'd say my favorite of all of them was probably Soul Calibur 4. I know that's kind of a hot take in certain circles, but being a PlayStation gamer, I loved having Darth Vader, even though it made no sense.
Yeah.
But I've played all of them, excluding Soul Blade. Soul Calibur was actually the first console game that I ever got on
Okay.
Dreamcast. And the number of hours that you and I played in that, Daniel, and then, God, the number of hours that my dad and I spent fighting just as Killick versus Mitsurugi. My dad was always Mitsurugi. And then once 2 came out, I switched over to primarily Raphael.
Yeah.
But just my absolute favorite fighting series of all time, and quite possibly the game that I've actually played the most.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
So that's my number 10.
So my number 10 is Madden 2003.
Nice.
Also up there for
03.
maybe the game I played the most. It was a toss-up between 03 and 04, but I think I played 3 more.
I remember watching you play that
yeah.
game and being so
It had
bored.
franchise mode on it, and I loved it. The franchise mode I thought was overall better. The Titans were really good on that version and better than the next year. Michael Vick in 04 is kind of an iconic character, so that was awesome. And I almost went with 4 because of that, but I actually thought the gameplay, even though it was later, the gameplay with the hit stick and some of those other things in the later version were not
Football
good.
Daniel's coming out, right?
I love Madden. I couldn't do it, like I couldn't leave it off. And the Madden franchise, that was kind of the golden era of the Madden franchise before it's kind of people play it a lot, but they've kind of begrudged where the series has ended up because it is like a staple. So, but 2003 Madden, also all those songs in the Madden soundtrack, where like Good Charlotte
Yeah.
and all the other things, and the Party Hard Andrew
Yeah.
WK song. Like it actually like there are like I still hear those songs and like have that association like all these years later.
I saw him live in
Oh my gosh.
2013, 14.
awesome.
It was awesome.
That's awesome.
No,
So that's
so-
We partied hard.
That's my number 10.
Nice. Sam?
My number 10 is the Super Nintendo Super Metroid.
Okay.
Nice.
I love that game.
Nice.
Samus was the best.
Love it.
Mm.
All right, number 9. For me, Far Cry 3.
Okay.
That was awesome. Game.
So I have not played 6. Far Cry 3 was my first Far Cry game. And what separated it to me from the ones that came after. So Far Cry, if you're not familiar, is first-person shooter with some vague RPG elements to it as far as like leveling up and getting better at things. But the story always revolves around your character is usually like it's a fish out of water kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And in Far Cry 3 specifically, you're just this dumb college student named Jason, just a bro. And you and your brother and his girlfriend and other friends are all vacationing on this kind of made up amalgam Polynesian island.
Mhm.
And you get kidnapped by these rebels, and your brother is killed in front of you. You escape. All of your other friends are still captured, and in the midst of your escape, you kill a man for the first time, and you just are this dude, bro. And it's a traumatic moment in the game, and the story is, of course, you have to then go and find and rescue your friends. But what was so unique about it and so brilliant and really captured me was that as you are progressing through the story and as you're leveling up and getting more skills and better at killing people, they wrote it in such a way and performed it in such a way that Jason starts liking it.
Mm-hmm.
And so it turns into this really in-depth and fascinating examination of what happens when you take just a normal person and force them into a violent situation and force them to be violent, and what happens. And it's, the effects on him and the people around him, and it's just phenomenal
That's awesome.
game.
Yeah.
So that's my number 9.
My number 9 is Age of Empires 2.
Heck yeah.
Which,
Yep.
you mentioned earlier, Steven, but I love that one. I played the original Age of Empires a good bit as well. But I think I played it after playing 2.
Yeah, same.
I never got the expansion pack for 1, which had the Romans in it, but I think I played a demo of it, which was still pretty good. But it was fun, but not quite as engaging. Although I did love all the old languages that they used for things, which is awesome.
Chopper.
Yeah, it's so great. But the Age of Empires 2 was just awesome, especially once you got the expansion pack with the Aztecs
Yep.
and the Japanese.
Yeah.
It was it's just one of my another one that I just logged countless hours playing. Mostly on my own, building worlds and playing through the campaigns, playing against the computer, a few times playing matchups against you guys when we could get 2 computers hooked up together, which was a pain in the butt back in the day.
Yeah.
But those games were a blast, and ended up playing a few Civ builders, Warcraft and a few others that I also enjoyed, but none of them I enjoyed as much as Age of Empires. The Star Wars.
Battlefront.
Battlefront.
Was
That was
great.
That was great.
You guys
wasn't
are taken
great.
from higher up on my list.
Okay, well, I'm not.
Yeah.
No. Well, we'll leave it at that. But that was a great rendition. But for me, Age of Empires 2 is just kind of the pinnacle of that for me.
Favorite faction?
I loved the Teutons.
Yep.
I love to be the Teutons,
Yep.
and you got the Knights, and you got that whole thing. But they were always great. And then I really liked also being the Japanese. The Japanese was fun. The samurais were never as good as I wanted them to be. They were never as useful because I think they were just like really good against archers. So it just kind of was weird. But that was great. And then in the expansion, the Aztecs were awesome. They're like Aztec warriors were
Yeah.
rad. So
Yeah. My number 10 is Super Mario on N64.
okay,
I loved that one.
yeah,
Nice.
Collecting all the stars. I remember that was like one of my first completion games. Like,
Yeah.
everything done for it.
yeah.
And I haven't, like, I liked all the Super Nintendo Marios, but that one was that was my Mario. I feel like everybody has a Mario that they, like, fully go into. And I haven't found another one. I've tried, and I'm just like, nah.
Yeah, I haven't
Nothing
played
really
the recent
goes.
Marios.
Yeah, I did on,
I've heard
like,
they're great, but
yeah, there's, it's the same, now he rides a little, like, pirate ship around.
All right, 8 for me is Dragon Quest 11.
okay.
Nice.
I adore that franchise. That one though, the story, the characters, the animation, everything is just spot on, and it made me fall in love with the series all over again.
Yeah.
Toriyama's art,
Yep.
everything is just spot on, and it's the gameplay is phenomenal, but the story and the characters are the thing that really drew me in the most. And it's just this band of I'm a sucker in fantasy, as we'll discuss going forward. I'm a sucker for found family
Yeah.
stories,
Yeah.
and Dragon Quest 11 is that.
Yes.
For sure.
And I'll just say that's my number 7. So, I'll just real quick, like, same. What I really loved about that was I enjoy turn-based RPGs and the gamification and figuring out what moves to do where and do that, which it does really, really well. But then truly, it's a wonderful story.
Yes.
And it's both a fantasy story that's really compelling, but it's also love anime, and it's like living out an anime.
Yep.
So I just wanted to say that there to piggyback on that.
That's
So
great.
we won't have to talk about it twice.
That's
Yeah.
great.
No, phenomenal game. So
Yeah.
that's my number 8. What's your number 8?
So my number 8 is GoldenEye.
Yeah.
Yes.
I
Nice.
should have said honorable mention for that.
Yeah, I untold hours playing with buds. The solo mode's actually pretty fun too. It's the only shooter on my list, and obviously other honorable mention Time Splitters 2. I did love playing Wolfenstein back in the day.
Yeah.
I grew up playing Wolfenstein and loved it, and I thought about it, but if Wolfenstein had a competitive mode, I might have jumped it back up, but it's just I didn't even mention honorable mentions, but I should. But GoldenEye just too much fun. The later Bond games were good, and the next Bond was underrated, but it's nothing compares to GoldenEye.
Do you remember the time that I came over and it was just you and me at the house?
Yeah.
And I don't remember which one it was, but it was I think it was one of the GameCube
Yeah,
Bonds.
Yeah. I can't
And
remember
your
the name of that
dad had
one,
just
yeah.
got a brand new sound system
Oh,
for the TV.
yeah.
Oh, turn
It
it
sounded
down.
like real gunshots.
We turned it up to where it was, yes, the volume was literal gunshot level. And
It was awesome.
we came so close to getting in very serious trouble.
Yeah, it was awesome. But yeah, GoldenEye doesn't actually hold up super well if you play it now.
Yeah, it's
'Cause
very hard to play.
The mechanics of these games have improved so much over the years, but
You have to, like, cheat the system.
yeah,
Like,
it's not
make it
great.
work.
But
It's a classic.
At the time,
Yeah.
it was a classic.
Absolute classic.
Sam?
Yeah.
Yeah, what's your
Slappers
number 8?
only. That was a fun mode. We always did pistols, right?
A lot of pistols.
lethal-
Pistols was one of the
One shot
the
kill. What was it
first
called?
ones, yeah.
Lethal kill.
Lethal.
One shot kill. What was it called?
One shot headshots only or whatever.
No,
Yeah.
there was like a mode. It was like one shot.
Wait, yeah. Where you just get killed off one shot. That was very fun.
Dang, what was that called though? It was
I
like
can't
lethal
remember.
license to kill. Was it?
Maybe it was
License?
licensed. Yeah, it was.
That would make
licensed
sense.
to
I can't remember. So now we're still on N64. My number 8 is Super Smash Brothers on the N64.
Okay.
I love that game, and I got really mad when I could not do as good as I did on the N64 on any of the newer Super Smash Bros.
That's funny.
But I was unbeatable on N64. I remember being an invincible Link.
Yeah.
So that was good. That was going to be my question. Was Link?
Oh, absolutely Link, all the way. I
Nice.
knew every trick to it, and I wish I could translate it to, the Switch and the Wii and everything after, but I just could never get to where I was. Sadly.
Story of growing up.
Yep.
All right, number 7 for me is Fallout 4.
Forgot to even put that.
I
That was a game.
I love it. I've put who knows how many hours into it. I love a lot of the things that they added into 4. I played 3 in New Vegas as well, but 4 just really connected.
Yes.
And maybe some of that is new and shiny, but I think that they just continued to improve the gameplay stuff, and I enjoyed the settlement building and like actually having a use
Yep.
for all the junk that you can just pick up
Yeah,
everywhere.
yeah, that was so good.
And the side quests and everything. I honestly, I've never, with all the hours I've put in, I've never beaten the main story, but that's pretty typical for me and Bethesda games. Is it's not about the story.
Yeah.
It's about going and making your own story and your own character with all these other side quests and everything. So it's just absolutely brilliant, and I love the world. I love the universe.
Yes.
Fallout.
So yeah, my 7 was Dragon
Dragon
Quest
Quest,
11.
yeah.
So
Yep.
we've already talked about that.
My 7 is Pokemon Yellow.
Okay.
I loved that, playing out the entire like anime, story as your, kind of Ash, but you can name your whatever. You have a little Pikachu. You get all the cool Pokemon like Bulbasaur and all that stuff. It was just great. I love that game so much. I remember working tirelessly to level everyone up to level 100.
Incredible.
Just, like fighting a bunch of like Kangaskhan's.
What was your favorite Pokemon in that game?
Mewtwo. Catching Mewtwo at the end, like he's the most overpowered like Pokemon, like insane. And once you caught him, it was like there's really no challenge left in the game. So it's like, well,
you've done everything.
what do I do now that I just have him? Yeah, so
Awesome. All right, 6 for me is Skyrim. Skyrim is another one I've no idea how many hours I've put into it. I distinctly remember the first night that I played it. I had gotten home from a trip to Florida. It was very late, so I only played for like an hour before I was falling asleep. And this is the only time I've ever experienced this with a game, ever. I fell asleep late, and I'm not a morning person. I woke up at 6 o'clock in the morning. No alarm. That's just my body woke up, and I woke up with the theme song for Skyrim literally blasting in my head. Like I was woken by the men,
yeah,
I had to go and play for the rest of the day.
Yeah.
So I adore Skyrim. It's got all the Bethesda jankiness in it, but the world is incredible. I love Elder Scrolls in general, and again, the Viking stuff, like it just clicked.
I'll have to piggyback too, because Skyrim is my number 2 game, and I feel like I should have put Fallout 4 right next to that. Like, just the Bethesda games, they're all kind of the same.
Yeah, they've got a good formula going.
But like, you make your own story. But yeah, Skyrim, I think I played 700 hours. I remember looking at the log, and I was like, whoa. But I did. That was where. So I like kind of got obsessed with completing games, and I know I completed everything that you could possibly.
That's incredible.
My number 6 is Dragon Warrior Monsters. The first of several monster catching games. Love the Dragon Quest franchise. I kind of felt bad putting it ahead of Dragon Quest 11, but I played that so much as a kid, as a young person on Game Boy, and I loved the differences between it and the Pokemon franchise, that there were like demons, and you did, breeding is a part of Pokemon later on, but it's not a main part. But then the concept of breeding a monster, and then you no longer get that monster. Like now you have an egg and you have a new thing, where that doesn't happen in the Pokemon series as much. But just really cool, like warping into different worlds, just everything about it. Also coming to realize that like you were warping into different stories from the other Dragon Quest games, which I didn't realize at the time, was something pretty cool. But just a blast to play, breeding and developing different monsters and training them up. Again, I love turn-based RPGs, and as far as a Monster Hunter game, it's a really classic rendition, which I didn't know at the time. Obviously, they didn't create this game till after Pokemon was out, but the whole idea of catching monsters is actually from, I think, Dragon Quest V, which is actually why Pokemon even exists. So it's like Dragon Quest actually spawned Pokemon, but then obviously Pokemon took off completely.
Yeah. That's kind of cool.
Phenomenal. I thought about adding that too. It's a great game.
Yep.
Great game. Sam, what's your 6?
Number 6 for me is Borderlands 2.
Heck yeah.
I love that game. Just bigger, better guns that have slag.
Yep.
Like, that was the
Yep.
best. Just shooting something into the head and watching just a green like explosion. Like, it's pretty great. I always loved sniping in those games. That
Yes.
was like the main thing I liked doing was like hiding way out and just taking on like a whole base.
I loved everything in that one. It's just
So
it's
fun.
that should also it's top 10. It's too small.
Yeah.
Borderlands 2 is phenomenal. That's another one. Sunk so many hours in that. Me and my dad played through the whole
Fun.
thing co-op.
What co-op? It's the best co-op.
It's phenomenal.
Such a good co-op.
All right, number 5 for me, BioShock. I love the whole BioShock franchise, but specifically the first BioShock. It was one of the first horror games that I played. But the atmosphere, the story, the twist, everything, it blew me away. And I've played it multiple times, and I love going back to Rapture every time. It's just a magical world. Yeah, I love the vibe. And the action and everything, the powers, it's just a great game. Phenomenal game.
I love it. My number 5 would be Pokemon Blue / Yellow, because they're kind of the same game, but not. But Blue was my first Pokemon game, and I got hooked on that franchise. Maybe the game I have the strongest emotional attachment to, but because it is, by today's standards, somewhat of a flawed game. That being said, it holds up if you play it now pretty well. But I was only going to put one Pokemon game on this list, but that ended up not feeling right, and so it's my number 5. Loved playing with Squirtle, catching, running through the gyms. It's just, it was a game that I just loved to start over again too, and then you would even plan to catch different monsters to build different teams, and it just had
lots of different saves.
Infinite replay value. Played it as an adult on emulators several times. Just a blast. Just an awesome game.
Perfect. Yeah.
Very nice.
It was number
5.
Mine is Galactic Battlefront.
Heck yeah, dude.
That. I mean, it's kind of the Age of Empires like sort of thing too. Like
Yeah.
I had to put them. They're both like the same level, but I think Battlefront was the most fun out of that. Mostly because you got to make like the Jedi.
Heck yeah, dude.
Like, you can send an army of Jedi.
I did
Like-
that frequently with the Sith.
No, I did.
Even though it's like it doesn't make sense at all, but
Yeah.
Bro, having
to.
like literally like 75 Sith Lords just all like shocking the shit out of some houses. It was like, this is awesome. Like, definitely like a 13-year-old's fever dream.
yeah,
For sure.
phenomenal.
But yeah, I just remember I love the scenario builders
Yep.
because you could just build like your own world. And so I'd make these like a massive like this Sith things that I had to go fight. It wouldn't make any sense. It'd be like, like literally like just a circle of like Sith castles, Sith temples, and I'd like have to somehow break through. Like,
Incredible.
But yeah, just the amount of Jedis you could have, just recreating that Clone Wars scene over and over again, like it was the best.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I love it. Number 4 for me, Red Dead Redemption 1 and 2.
Dang, I should've
if I had to pick
that.
one, probably would pick 2.
Yeah.
But they're both so goddamn good. The story is phenomenal. Again, characters are stunning.
What's scarier than that grizzly bear too?
Bro.
Like that's the scariest thing ever.
The first time you get mauled by a bear in Red Dead 2, it's chilling. But Red Dead 1, I remember I spent so much time just playing poker and hunting. Like with the poker especially, I would get on it. I would sit at a table, and I would get in these moods where I'm just like, I'm gonna take every dime from every single one of you, and I wouldn't stop playing until I had made every other person at the table leave. And so I'd be sitting there for an hour or so just playing Texas Hold'em
so funny.
until I had taken every cent from the rest of these cowboys at the table. And then Red Dead 2, I remember distinctly, was the first game that I'd played since Skyrim, where I would spend hours just riding to some point in the distance, and I'd get there, like not doing any story, not doing anything, just riding. And I'd get to the top of some mountain or something and look around and be like, oh my God, this is gorgeous. Oh, what's that over there?
Yeah.
And then I just ride over there and get there and just, oh, wow, this is beautiful. Like just doing literally nothing but riding my horse around, and it fulfilled like every childhood cowboy fantasy that I ever had. So that's number 4.
Yep. It's like aptly placed.
So my number 4 is Smash Brothers Melee, which
That's
is
the
the
GameCube.
Wii. That's the Wii one. Brawl is the. I thought about doing Brawl, and honestly, I thought about doing the original, and I thought about including Ultimate. They're all great games. Honestly, the original and Ultimate maybe are the best mechanically for the actual fighting. And Ultimate's great because you can do the online play, which is really fun. But the one I feel like for me resonated the most was Melee. The story mode was actually pretty enjoyable, and I played a lot with friends. I was an Ike main, absolutely love Ike, and so I love those games. And I do believe Melee is the first time Ike was included, and so that one kind of had to be the one for me. But
Yeah.
Smash Brothers is my favorite fighting game, favorite fighting game franchise. So that had to be my number 4.
It's great. This was somebody's already, and I think it was maybe your honorable mention, but Dynasty Warriors 4 is
Yeah.
my number 4.
Yeah.
Yeah, just Lubu and just his gigantic halberd. He
Yeah.
would just
So good.
and yeah, just unstoppable. Him and then the samurai dude. Lubu was the one that I would love to just go kill 1,000 people. Like that was my favorite part,
Yeah.
is just to make that, like, find everybody there. Make sure not to kill the leader, because then if you kill the leader, the respawn doesn't happen
Right.
anymore. So you keep his health real low and like kind of handicap him somewhere, and then just have all these people just charging and just kill them. I think the most I ever got was probably, I think I hit 3,000 one time.
Wow.
I think that's
That's
what I did.
awesome.
I spent a long time keeping those
Yep.
leaders alive though. So
Yep.
There were some really fun characters to unlock. Because I played it a bunch before I realized you could actually get Lubu.
Yeah,
Which
yeah.
that was an awesome moment. Then there was the weird girl with the boomerang.
yeah,
That was
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah.
And then I also loved the one spear guy's son with the absolutely giant sword.
Gan Ning or something.
Yeah, I can't remember what his name is, but I'd love playing that guy.
That game was so good.
It was so fun.
All right, top 3. Number 3 for me is Witcher 3.
Okay.
It's the only Witcher game I've played because it was the only one on PlayStation. I had read a couple of the books before, but that was really the thing that got me sold on the Witcher universe,
Yeah.
and I just absolutely fell in love. Played it several times, and again, like common theme. It's Western RPG. I love RPGs in general. I probably lean towards Western RPGs a little bit more, so it ticks all those boxes for me. Again, another just absolutely gorgeous open world game, which I
Yeah.
also love.
No kidding.
And phenomenal characters, phenomenal performances, phenomenal story, and a world that I fell in love with and wanted to keep going back to.
Love it.
Love it. Yeah.
My number 3 is Zelda Breath of the Wild. I played only 2. I played a little bit of Ocarina of Time, but I never finished it. It was like way later on a 3DS, and then I played Zelda Link's Awakening, which was a Game Boy game, which is also a phenomenal game, and they just recently did a remaster that I'd like to play at some point. But Breath of the Wild, Zelda doing the open world thing, you mentioned in Red Dead Redemption where you would just ride around. Zelda Breath of the Wild has those same feelings where you're just exploring, doing nothing, sort of in the Zelda universe, and I just found it immensely pleasurable. I played it during the pandemic, mostly.
Yeah.
So it was a huge and wonderful escape. And I think that's part of the reason I have such an attachment to that game, is spent a ton of time being indoors, exploring, the Hyrule world. There's so many nooks and crannies in that game that I did eventually beat it, but it's like not a game that's about beating Ganon barely at all. It's like,
Yeah.
it's just doing things, exploring, finding new nooks and crannies, different weapons and things. And I've not completed, but I've greatly enjoyed the new entry in that same series that recently came out, that the name of I'm just totally blanking on right now. But
Awesome.
the one where you fall out of the sky. But whatever. Yeah, but Breath of the Wild, I
playing
felt
that
overall
too.
is the superior game.
We're at number 3.
Yes.
Mine is also a Zelda game, but it's Ocarina of Time. I would have
Okay.
put Breath of the Wild just because I think it's so great and
Yeah.
kind of groundbreaking in a lot of ways for that franchise. But Ocarina of Time was the one that I
Yeah.
first played. I mean, I could say the same for Pokemon too. Like I loved all the other ones too. Like Crystal was probably the most fun to play.
Yeah.
And Breath of the Wild, I think, is probably a little bit more fun than Ocarina of Time. But Ocarina of Time was such the whole universe. My favorite part about Ocarina of Time is the music in it.
Yeah.
Like in how you have to play like the little
Yep.
the Ocarina. I mean, that's the whole thing. It's
Yep.
you have to. It's all centered around the music and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And then beating that fire temple. That was the best.
Yep.
Get the
Very
red-
cool.
Well, that was
red
Tears of the
outfit.
Kingdom. The new Zelda's Tears of the Kingdom.
That's right.
Based on the name.
All right, number 2. Number 2 for me is the new God of War. I grew up playing the original God of War games. Absolutely loved them. And I think it is probably difficult to appreciate the new games without having played them. Not impossible, but the change in Kratos' character is definitely definitely a much different and more rich experience, having seen what he came from, the monster that he truly was. But these new ones, I kind of have to lump them together because the story it's a continuous story. But it's got the Norse thing going for it, which I absolutely love. But again, as frequent in this list, it's the story and the characters. And having played both of them, I started playing the first of the new batch when my eldest daughter was just born. So playing both of these entries as a dad and seeing Kratos' journey as a father, and it made me, I cried. It touched me very deeply multiple times throughout these games. But all of that, all these amazing changes that he's made trying to be a better man, it is still absolutely brutal and like just pure God of War violence and action. And talk about just one of the most beautiful games ever, especially Ragnarok. They knocked it out of the park. It's just stunning, absolutely stunning.
My number 2 is Brave Fencer Musashi on the original PlayStation, a Japanese style RPG that I think was like a hack and slash RPG, but with a great, hilarious story that was I think meant to be a competitor to kind of the Legend of Zelda series, which is not really a traditional RPG, but Square Enix wanted to do something to kind of, I think, compete in that space. But such a fun story of the famous legendary Musashi samurai being like magically teleported to this medieval fairy kingdom that's under stress, and he's got his sword fuchsia that he can use to absorb the powers of monsters, and then is given the large legendary sword Lumina. It's fun because the swords are what level up, not Musashi.
Isn't he really small too?
He's really small. When he shows up, he's really small for whatever reason. But it's got some really great kind of like polygon style art, and it's just a world of fun. It took me a really long time to finish it because it was actually still in that vein of games. At least as a young person, it was like to solve some of the puzzles, and like there were like really disparate clues on how to solve things, and it was not obvious what you were supposed to do. So I didn't finish it until like I could read about some of the things later online to like because game guides didn't really exist. Like there was not just like information available about games online like there
You had to
was
buy them,
nowadays. Yeah, you had to buy game guides, or finding things was a lot harder. But eventually did complete it. Had a relationship with that game over many years, and just it's a game I don't even know if it would be considered a cult classic, but I think in some communities it's a game that's considered beloved. But it's one I would love. It probably never will, but I would love for it to get a remaster someday.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Sam?
Sam, you're number 2.
Mine was Skyrim, so we don't.
Yeah, we did already talk.
All right, so our number ones. Number 1 for me is The Last of Us Part 1 and 2.
Yeah.
Similar to Red Dead, I guess if I had to pick one, I would pick the first one. Last of Us Part 1, but they're intricately linked for me. I've I've never felt as connected to a character in any game as I did Joel. I don't know that I've felt as connected to a character in pretty much any medium as I did playing Joel. Um, I started it before I had kids, obviously with the first game. Second one came out after I'd been a dad for a couple of years, and it has wrecked me over and over again. And it's Naughty Dog, so the gameplay is phenomenal. The story is impeccable. The performances by every member of the cast is stunning. And you just fall in love with these characters and care so deeply about them. And I don't want to give any spoilers or anything for either game, but I am solidly Team Joel in the first game, and every decision that he made is one until the very, very last one is exactly what I would have done. But I also in part two, I fell just as in love with Abby, and felt just as the same kind of paternal feelings for her as I did Ellie, and the ending of that game is just absolutely devastating. It's they're in my mind they're essentially perfect games. They hit every nail on the head as far as gameplay, world building, the graphics, the storytelling, the script, the performances. Everything is a 10 out of 10 for me, and I forever will love those games.
Yeah,
It's awesome.
they were so fun. It's the only game that Tink watched me play.
Yeah.
It's such a cinematic. It's I feel sad that I didn't put it on my list at all.
So
Number
Daniel,
one,
number one.
Yeah, no, my number one is Pokemon Crystal / Silver, the second series of Pokemon games that came out, and Pokemon series is definitely the game series I've played the most of any game, and just countless hours catching and leveling up monsters and going through. But that game was probably the first game I played that had a post game after you beat the Indigo Plateau. Then you can get a ticket on a ferry to get to Kanto, and then go back through the world of the first game, the nation of the first game, and then there was so much more to do. The game was so much bigger that I have such a strong relationship with that one. Silver was the first I played, being that came out, and then Crystal, similar to how Yellow was the first time, was their third money-making installment. But they added a bunch of quality of life improvements, so that probably is overall the better game, and I really enjoyed playing that. And they also added a little more story elements with Suicune, the
dog,
ice
the
dog.
legendary dog,
legendary ice dog. Legendary
Raikou.
dogs. Yeah,
Was there a fire dog?
there was a fire dog. I can't remember the name of
Etney.
it now. Etney, yeah.
Oh, Entei.
Entei. There it is. But love those games. Just have so many fond memories. The replay value was always so high, where you do a new party, catch a new monster. Definitely, there would be things I would always have a plan that I wanted to accomplish in that next go around, and just absolutely love those games.
Yeah, they were so good. My number one game is Final Fantasy X.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yep.
That was so much fun, and I played every part that you could play so much, and I think I fell in I wonder if other people fall in this pitfall where you level up your character so much that when you get to the final boss, your legendary sword takes him out in one hit. And all of this stuff is so cinematic. I just remember them like, oh, I'm now gonna assume my final form, and then I get to it, I just one hit and come again. I was like, the build-up is pretty insane. And even the characters would be talking back and forth like, oh, I don't know how much longer we can hold. I was like, bro, our health hasn't even gone down. Like, there's nothing wrong at all. Like, don't overreact. But yeah.
Yeah.
That's
10 was a good game.
I think 10 is the only Final Fantasy game that I've put any significant amount of time into.
Yeah, I
Didn't
think
beat it, but I loved my
very
time.
I think that's right. I'd played a demo of 7 and a demo of 8, which the demos were both very enjoyable, but I never played more than that. Watched someone play 9,
I think we played 10 together.
We did play 10 together.
Yeah.
Now I remember seeing you guys play that, and that's why I bought it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So
Yeah.
I was watching y'all play. I was like, this looks fun.
We must have rented it. Did we rent it?
Yeah,
I think I
Blockbuster.
was
Back when people
borrowing it from a
rented
friend.
games.
Blockbuster
Okay,
games.
Yeah.
I was borrowing it, and then they were like, "Hey, I want it back,"
Okay, and then
and I had to give it back before
yeah,
we finished.
That makes
it.
sense.
Sad day.
Makes sense.
But great list, guys.
Yeah,
Phenomenal.
it's fun.
All right. Thank you all for listening. This Under Towers podcast. We've run out of space on the other card for the other camera, so I'm going to close this out here. You can find me on Instagram at I am Citizen Insane. Daniel is I am the Mighty Oak on Instagram and Twitter. Sam is Sam McLeod. But check him out. Horsebread is his new band. He's got some amazing songs releasing. So, and then us as Under Towers on Twitter and Instagram. And yeah, we love y'all. Namarie. Catch you next time.